Good morning and welcome to the second day of the Holland House Mexico Breakout Room at the Mexico Oil and Gas Summit. This session is organized by Holland House Mexico in partnership with Mexico Business. My name is Thomas Rebay. I'm responsible for the energy and maritime sector within Holland House Mexico, and I will be the host of this session. Holland House Mexico is the Dutch-Mexican Chamber of Commerce based in Mexico City. Our goal is to facilitate the success of Dutch companies in the Mexican market and also to promote international trade, investment, and sustainable business development between the Netherlands and Mexico. Before we start, I would like to go through some house rules. We'd like to remind you that the Chatham House rules applies to this session. And we would like to invite you during the entire event to place your questions in the chat box. After each presentation and panel, there will be time for questions. We would like to remind you that to keep your microphone on mute during the presentations and panels. In today's breakout room program, we will focus on Dutch success stories and Dutch technology in the Mexican oil and gas industry. And we're very glad to be accompanied by leading players from the sector. Throughout the day, we will also have a number of networking opportunities and moments to connect with the Holland House Mexico team. So without further ado, let's move on to the first presentation. We are very glad to be accompanied by Lucia Bustamante, the head of government relations at Shell Mexico. Lucia joined Mexico in 2012. And prior to this position, she held various positions within the government relations team of BP. Today, Lucia will provide us with insights into supply chain development in the Mexican oil and gas sector. So Lucia, over to you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Thomas. Great to be here with you. Thank you for the great invitation. I'm quite honored. Maybe we can go ahead and talk a little bit about supply chains. I know this might be something of interest to your audience. So if we can go to the next one, please. I don't expect everybody to read this. It's impossible to read, but I need to show it to you. Please don't go buying any stock from Shell after this presentation. Thanks, Thomas. You can go to the next. I thought it would be a good idea to actually show you a little bit of what Shell is doing in Mexico. We have grown quite a bit. It was 30 of us in 2016, and about 150 in 2017. And now it's about 230 folks in Shell in Mexico City and other cities as well, because you do know that we have some retail stations around the country. So we have 9 deepwater exploration blocks that we won in the bid rounds in 2018. Unfortunately, these bid rounds have been stopped by the current administration. We have over 234 retail stations in 17 states in the country. We do sales of natural gas and liquefied natural gas. We do sales of petchems and lubricants. And we're potentially evaluating an entry into jet fuel or aviation fuel. We constantly focus on hiring and contracting local talent and local suppliers. So we can go to the next one, Thomas. Thank you. We consider local content, as we see it in Shell, as a myriad of things that happen in country that can go from employment of nationals to the investment in infrastructure and utilities provision. And there's everything in between. But basically, we focus on benefiting the national economy, the regional economy, and the local community, which is often a neighbor of our operations. Today, our footprint is quite small still. We are operating through great, fabulous contractors such as Halliburton, Grupo R, El Servicio, and you'll get to learn more about them in a bit. We also focus a lot on benefiting indigenous people women and or historically disadvantaged or marginalized groups. And usually we do this through supply contracts. So we look for minority-owned or women-owned businesses. In the US, for example, the spend in these businesses is upwards of $300 million a year. And so this goes beyond really our social investment strategy. This is really a focused, strategic business innovation strategy. It just makes good business sense. To us, local content is not philanthropy, but rather it's strategic. Having your certified or trusted suppliers next to you is just, it just makes sense, right? Commercially, operationally, etc. Thanks, Thomas. We can go to the next one. I've talked a little bit about why local content matters. Basically, it's a positive contribution to the community, but it increases access to new business opportunities and establishes a local sustainable supply chain, which is good for us. It reduces costs, it reduces risk in our supply chain, and it actually allows us to partner with the country in a sense, because folks that actually understand the country, operate in country, probably have a better idea of how to operate for Shell in the country. And this obviously includes ethics and compliance and other soft issues that sometimes we find are forgotten by suppliers, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. We can go to the next one, Thomas, thank you. So I told you that we were going to have some really good examples. So drilling services, for the first time, Grupo R has been working for an international oil company with its Muralla 4 rig. They have managed a 3-well campaign, and I must say that the industrial safety in the rig has been exceptional. We have managed to have goal zero, which means we have 0 incidents on the platform since it started operating in Mexico. So we're quite proud of that venture with them. They have themselves understood that they need to be our strong partners in this venture, and they were willing to adopt a lot of the Shell standards that we have for operations globally. So I think that's a really great example of how maybe a supplier that had been used to just working with one company can now be able to work with other companies, international companies, and even beyond Mexico. I'll move on to the integration of drilling and logistics services. This was a really innovative contract that we came up with here in Mexico with Halliburton. They're managing all of our integrated services, and they in turn subcontract other contractors to help them manage this contract. So it's been quite a successful model, the one that we came up with in Mexico, probably to be replicated in other areas like Colombia, Brazil, French Guiana even, or Suriname. So yeah, we're looking forward to kind of start talks with all of our suppliers here in Mexico and maybe try to expand these contracts. The helicopters contract was actually also very, very innovative. This helicopter that you see here in this picture is a Sikorsky S-97 helicopter. These did not exist operationally in Mexico, and these are what are needed for deep water operations when you're flying for more than 3, 4, 5 hours. These guys are huge. They have a ton of backup systems, a lot of safety involved in these aircrafts. And thus, we had to train Mexican pilots to fly these new helicopters that were coming into play. So we sent 40 Mexican pilots to New Orleans. They trained for a little bit over a year alongside our Gulf of Mexico pilots. So we're quite happy about the result with this one. It's the first time in Mexico that we have a search and rescue helicopter and also a crew change helicopter, thus making it very safe for us to operate, because meanwhile you transport folks, you also have a search and rescue helicopter at the helipad. So this was quite innovative, something we hadn't done before. And our friends at El Servicio in Veracruz, again, were very willing to partner with us, adopt some of our safety standards that are quite rigorous, and also adopt our training. So this was quite a great partnership. And Thomas, maybe if you are recording this and later would like to share this presentation, I might just send you the link to a video that we produced in the Talasa, the rig that we had operating prior to Muralla 4. But you will be able to see the heliport in action, and it's quite exciting. We can go to the next one. This is development of suppliers in other pieces of the supply chain. Everybody thinks that upstream is the biggest, the hardest. Nobody can work for Shell, but actually there's other pieces in the value chain that make so much sense to supply locally. One great example is fabrication yards in Mexico. Again, we partnered with 3 Mexican companies there to produce modules for a Pennsylvania chemicals facility in the US. So around 80% of these modules were produced in Mexico. It was quite a successful contract. We closed it last year, but it's one of those really great examples that permeate throughout the supply and contracting network within Shell. A lot of savings from supplying from Mexico. We have also found a Mexican company to do our retail visual identity. Prior to finding them, we had been importing all the visual identity pieces from Malaysia. And so now that we have actually trained and partnered with this company in Toluca, we are now probably moving to trying to export visual identity from Mexico to the US. So now this company obviously can see an increase in their sales for sure. Uniforms and safety shoes. The safety shoes we're making in León, Guanajuato. These are the safety shoes for all of the folks that work in our retail stations, gasoline stations. And again, we're trying to potentially source uniforms and shoes from Mexico to other countries in the world. Road transportation, we've also partnered with a few fleets in Mexico, Nieto, TLH, CISA. And again, we've had to work a lot on driving standards, journey management standards, ethics and compliance, driver training, etc. But it's been quite a fruitful partnership with local Mexican companies. We can go to the next one. Thanks. Basically, as we create these opportunities, we also find other places where we might see some space to grow in the Mexican supply chain. It's getting harder. I have to be honest with you. It's getting harder with just the status of regulation, government intent out there to get these opportunities to work, but they are still out there. We have mentioned a few here in the high value, high return, let's say box. These require a lot of stamina, a lot of expertise to bring on, but these are some of the opportunities that we see in the upstream. We do see other opportunities in downstream. However, with some obstacles and blockers that we've seen in the regulatory environment, and particularly with the downstream regulator, the Energy Regulatory Commission, it has been harder for us to open new retail stations. All of our permits are stuck in CRE, and so obviously this slows down our ability to partner with new suppliers for new services. And obviously those suppliers wouldn't need to have this huge capital that you need to start operations in upstream. They probably would be in a better position to supply goods and services to Shell in a downstream space. So anyway, this is what we have seen. I hope this is of interest to you. Thomas, I think we have some space for Q&A. Maybe we open up to that, if that's okay.
Sure, Lucia, definitely. Well, one question. Perhaps you have questions coming in there as well.
I have two actually, and I have one that's just mine that I'm very curious about, because of course Shell started to develop its sourcing hub in Mexico a long time ago, before local content requirements were really an issue. And then over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of debate about how is local content going to be measured, and is that actually going to work? What has been your experience now that you've had a couple of years under your belt actually also measuring your local content? Because of course, in your presentation, you explain how it all makes sense and the success stories, but I'm pretty sure that every success story you've also had to measure down to, I guess, to a pretty detailed level on how you measure the local content. How has that experience been, and what has been hard and what has been easier than you thought?
Definitely the regulatory environment to measure local content is not an easy one. It's filled with administrative burdens and a lot of things that we need to do, like showing every single invoice from every single supplier, etc. It's been easier in the sense than we thought, because our finance department was absolutely fabulous. And they were anticipating how hard this would be if we would have to do it manually. So they went ahead and implemented SAP modules that help us calculate local content. However, I do understand that this might not be easy for every single company to do. It's expensive, it takes a while, and you need to train folks to do this. But in a sense, we did understand the crux of the issue, which was the fact that the government needed to understand where some of the opportunities were generated. We worked on this regulation for a very long time with the prior administration, trying to explain that measuring is not the same as developing suppliers, right? They're two very different things, and measurement doesn't guarantee at all that you are going to actually develop suppliers locally. However, and to your point, Jeroen, about starting a supply chain way before energy reform, we had a supply office I think 2011, we opened it up. It just talks to not only our responsibility as an international company to do this, but again, the fact that it is so strategic to us. So finding good suppliers is at the heartbeat of Shell, right? And developing those suppliers to potentially supply other projects around the world. So that's what's interesting about companies like ours. We really don't need regulation to push us to develop local suppliers. We do it on our own. So anyway, going back to your question, 2 years into this, We had a cap of 3% local content for upstream projects because we knew it was going to get very difficult to try and source everything from Mexico. But fortunately, we just got the number for 2020 and we're at 14%, 1/4. So again, it goes back to a lot of strategic thinking on what you need. And obviously, these large contracts like Grupo R, El Servicio, and Halliburton for sure help that, right? Because Halliburton has almost 100% Mexican talent working for them in Dos Bocas. So it does help. You have to be strategic about it. You have to anticipate. You do have to have a plan, but it's doable. It's certainly doable.
Yeah, and I'll take the liberty to ask one more. As you were saying, there's a difference between measurement of local content and supplier development. And of course, the measurement you do with the government, and supplier development, hopefully you do not just at the Shell level, but at the industry level. To which extent are you cooperating with the other operators through DMEC, through other relationships you have with your co-competitors? And what are the main recommendations that you have in terms of supplier development? Because this is a game where if one wins, everyone wins. So sharing best practices should be an incentive. And since you were early to the game, you probably have some suggestions.
Yeah, and to the probably frustration of all of our suppliers, contracting and procurement is quite a strategic activity for companies. So we don't share a lot of best practice because that's part of our strategy. So unfortunately, and we hear suppliers, they say, gosh, you guys, you asked me for something and then somebody else asks me for something different. Can't you just get talking and ask me for the same thing? I do hear it loud and clear, but the fact that this is so strategic and it's at the core of our competitive advantage, we often don't share that much. We do share a lot on the, for example, HSSE standards, right? So industrial safety standards, that is something that is quite open. Everybody shares it, and that benefits suppliers as well. But going down to the nitty-gritty about how we procure stuff, how we contract, how we negotiate, how we actually land on plans to increase capabilities for some of these suppliers, that is definitely not shared, Jeroen. So I'm sorry if that's not the answer that you wanted, but that's just how it works. It's so strategic that we would be probably entering into some antitrust issues if we shared this information. Because you would be talking about pricing, you would be talking about conditions of fabrication yards, you would be talking about volumes, and so we can't talk about those things. But yeah, I do have a lot of recommendations. I often focus when I talk to suppliers on the soft piece that often gets forgotten. So the ability to actually give a presentation that is good and that has the information that Shell needs to know. Going back to the safety point, being able to measure your own industrial safety percentages or being able to show that you have an industrial safety program in your company is going to certainly give you points. Having folks that speak English in your company will give you tons of points, because usually my specialists in different categories, because we source through categories. I mean, I don't have somebody that's sourcing like everything, right? We have a specialist on rigs. We have a specialist in, for example, drilling fluids. So we have categories for everything. And those subject matter experts for those categories for sure are not going to be in Mexico City, right? I probably have to pull from my international cadre of SMEs. And so please get somebody in your company that speaks English. I often focus a lot on percentage of gender equality. So I will ask you how many women you have in decision-making positions. And if you tell me 0, probably I won't like you very much. So think about diversity and inclusion in your company. That's something that's really important for Shell. We also sometimes talk about ethics and compliance, right? And having a code of conduct and being willing and able to not make any facilitation payments in the country, right? To get stuff from customs or to get equipment or to get a permit or what have you. So that's a huge thing that we focus on. We will look, for example, at your financial standing. And that doesn't mean that if you don't have the perfect financial standing, we won't work with you, but then probably we will try to work hand in hand with you to get you to a better place, right? So that you really can become a constant and expected supplier for Shell. So a lot of these success stories that I've talked about here didn't happen from one day to the next. For example, with Fleet, we've worked with some of these companies for 1.5 or 2 years to close gaps, right? So it's a long journey. It is a long journey, but I think it's a fruitful one for those suppliers that are willing to take on the challenge, that are willing to walk hand in hand with us, because then they'll be ready for somebody else to hire them, somebody else similar to Shell. Yeah.
Thank you, Lucia. I think you gave some excellent recommendations there. If we look specifically at Dutch suppliers, what would be your recommendation for a Dutch company to enter the market, the Mexican market on the one hand, and on the other to become a supplier of Shell Mexico?
Yeah. So my recommendation always is to understand the lay of the land before you get here. The best way of doing that is actually partnering with a company that's already here, with a Mexican company that's already here, that can give you the knowledge and the local capacity to do business. And Dutch companies bring this international expertise, probably a lot on the ethics and compliance side that we like. So it's a really good partnership, a really good marriage. I can say that we did the same, for example, in lubricants. We had a macro distributor that had been our macro D since 1926. And we have now a joint venture with them, right? So we brought a lot of knowledge, particularly in the industrial safety side, but they brought the operational knowledge of distribution of lubricants in Mexico. So that was really useful for us to have, right? So if you can find those strategic partners that actually make you like 1 + 1 = 3 instead of 2, that can actually give you that jump start, I would recommend it. Holland House is the perfect place to do that. They know how to do partnering and find opportunities for Dutch companies. So yeah, get close to Holland House and talk to Thomas, because they will know what's going on. They are talking to us, and so they could help you out. How do you become a supplier to Shell Mexico? I'm not going to say it's an easy feat, because it's not. We don't have like supplier directories where you can jot down your name and present your company. As I said, we do most of our contracting and procurement through categories. And so we proactively go out to the market and look for specific categories depending on the project. So you will never see us go out or have opportunities for contracting in a website. That won't happen. But believe me, we know who's out there. We will look for you. And if in the meantime, you are working on these soft issues that I just talked about, then you're just getting yourself in a better place to be selected.
Excellent. Thank you, Lucia. Thank you for your time, for being with us. I think that was the last question.
Fantastic.
Excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are a little bit ahead of schedule, which is good.
Okay.
Thank you, Lucia. We will now move on to the next element of today's session. We will dive into marine energy solutions for the oil and gas sector. And we're very glad to be accompanied by Hisham Sabir, who is the Business and Innovation Advisor of Dutch Marine Energy Center. Hisham leads the market development efforts of Dutch Marine Energy Center, DMEC. He advises marine energy partners on international growth, innovation management strategies, and fundraising. And he's also responsible for partnership opportunities with corporations in adjacent markets. Hisham, thank you for being with us. Over to you.
Thank you so much for the kind intro, and it's a pleasure to be here with the Holland House Mexico today. I know it's early in Mexico, but I'm happy to be part of this conference today. And indeed, I would like to bring maybe the renewable side of the conversation to the table, particularly around marine energy. I have a background in solar and in venture finance in California, and live in Amsterdam now. I will be happy to follow up on the conversation after the presentation. But maybe let's dive in now. What exactly are we going to talk about? Next slide. Thank you. So what is marine energy? Marine energy is the power that's extracted from rivers, sea, and oceans. So today, 40% of the world population lives less than 100 kilometers away from the coast. And there's, I think, an opportunity to power those communities directly from the sea, given the enormous energy power and potential that it has. Why focus on marine energy? First, so for the local consideration I just mentioned, but also because it's very complementary to solar and wind. If you look today at the energy systems of the future, there's a big question around the base load, and there's a lot of research going on and conversations around batteries, for instance. And I think marine energy is one of those renewables that can play a very interesting role for base load. Who we are, so DMEC is a Dutch Marine Energy Center, and it's an accelerator specialized in marine energy and renewables, globally with a strong focus on Europe too. And our mission is really to accelerate the intake of those solutions globally and try to contribute to a greener, more sustainable energy landscape. Next. So how we do that? So there are about 200 to 300 companies that fit the marine energy definition, spread across more than 30 countries. And what we do is provide innovation services where we help innovators and entrepreneurs make their solutions better fits for markets through certification and co-design, things like this. The purpose is to make them also investment ready for those who are earlier stage. So we have a strong capital arm that will have investor-facing relations. And to facilitate the investment landscape, I think there's a necessity to do work on policy. That's where our policy team comes in, particularly strong in Holland, very active in Europe, and we're looking at how can we make the European landscape investment friendly for marine energies. But eventually those companies we accelerate and those solutions will only be relevant if there's a market outlet for that. If there are clients out there think that those solutions solve a problem they have, and if there are sectors that benefit from those solutions. And that's what I would like to dive in a little bit now. So these 250 companies They are split across multiple subsection. Next slide, please. So what are the constituting building blocks of marine energies? There are four main types of marine energies. One is wave energy, so it speaks for itself. That's the energy you can extract from the waves of the ocean. Tidal energy. This is energy that you extract from ebb and flow, from underwater currents, and you have to think of it as like in most cases it's a turbine that will spin due to the movement of water. Closer to the equator, you also have a huge potential for ocean thermal energy conversion, which creates electricity from the difference in temperature between warm surface and cold deep waters. That's particularly relevant, of course, around the Mexico area. And then salinity gradients is produced by this salinity difference between between clear and salt waters. Typically, it's in a delta or in areas where rivers will go into sea. But so those four blocks are the main ones when it comes to marine energies, but there are also, I think, two sectors that you might be familiar with, which are floating solar and floating wind, which do not generate electricity directly from the water, but share so many commonalities between with the marine energies, particularly around permitting, around installation, maintenance, and some elements of design that they're often included in the family. So it's no news now that renewables for the last couple of years have received a massive influx of both investments, but also private project funding. Governments across the globe have very clear renewable targets. And marine energy is also part of that transition. So there's now, we're seeing an uptake in investments, uptake in a number of projects in the water, and it's just part of this whole transformation that our energy sector is going through. Next slide. So why marine energy? What are its key kind of defining properties? One is that it's reliable. So tides, for instance, can be predicted decades in advance, and waves have, due to the inertia of water, have a much more predictable and regular pattern. And so that's what I was talking about earlier in terms of baseline. We see marine energies as a potential to provide this kind of constant baseload of electricity that our energy system needs. Scalable, I think today in the world, the global potential for marine energy is almost doubles of our current electricity consumption. And it's less intrusive than a lot of the other solutions, particularly in renewables that we have today. So yeah, we think those are unique selling points that make marine energies relevant for a variety of sectors. It's also been largely de-risked in the last 10 years. And there's more than 3 billion euros that went of investment that went in marine energy. And that's 70% of it is private investment. And as a result, we see today that there's more and more projects in the water. After a phase of maybe technical exploration, we're entering now a phase of deployment. Next slide. So where are those deployments happening? This is why we look at what we call specialized markets. The idea is that marine energies will not, the idea is not, of course, to replace or compete even with other forms of renewables. It's to complement them. And so we're looking at which markets have specific requirements, specific needs that are maybe better answered by marine energy solutions. And in each of those markets, we look at what what is the cutting edge of marine energies, and which players there could answer that. So naturally, oil and gas, because we're here today, has proven to be a market where the characteristics of energy consumption, demand, and localization are pretty close to what marine energy can offer. But we're also listing a few others here, namely aquaculture, which is I think 50% of the world's produce now comes from aquaculture. And utilities, particularly around large-scale offshore wind deployments, are also one of the key markets we look at. On the side, you see also logistics and constructions, because there are a number of companies that are today serving, for instance, the oil and gas industry or the offshore wind industry, that are looking at how much of an opportunity is marine energy represents for them. So next slide. So how do we do this? If you're in one of those markets, there's a process that we put in place to understand, first of all, the marine energy fit with your specific market, understanding the specificities of your business. Then we usually run a feasibility study where we look at the business case and then detail the system characteristics for your specific environment. As you can imagine, having a system plugged into an aquaculture farm versus an oil and gas platform are very different. And so we need to understand where in the world you are, how is the energy environment around you, and then what kind of solutions could be applied to your specific case. Then we select typically a number of developers globally that have a solution that might be a fit for your market. And then together we build the baseline for an inside deployment. And usually this is a test, a pilot site where we assess the match between the predicted power delivered and business case versus actuals. Next slide. Thank you. So I would like to dive in now a little bit on the case of the North Sea. Naturally, given our geography and the history of marine energy, Europe has been kind of at the forefront of the development of marine energies. And there are, off the coast of Norway and the UK, a number of oil and gas players that were at least curious about the fit with marine energies, and that's how this project started. The idea was, how could we electrify some of those platforms, those that are far from shore? How could we find an alternative, maybe to pulling a cable from the shore, and those that were maybe on the way to decommissioning? How would a solution look like? Next slide, please. So that was it was really interesting to understand what the specific requirements for the oil and gas industry would be in the case of electrification by marine energies. And first of all, there's the natural question of where would you get the electricity from? Particularly if you look at platforms that are on the route to decommissioning, there are more than 100 in the North Sea. How do we power platforms that have a fairly low commercial value? And what is the vision for those platforms in the future? There's been a lot of talk around things like energy islands, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slides. But I want to stay here a little bit longer because it was important for the sector to understand how specific some of the oil and gas requirements were, and how specific the environment around the platforms were. I think the previous speaker also said a few words about how important it was to know your local markets and clients and geography before doing business. I think that's something we also recognize in this endeavor. So, of course, resisting salinity and marine conditions, particularly in the North Sea, are pretty standard. But the high uptime and reliability, for instance, is something that that is hard to compromise on for in the oil platform markets, while in the utility side it's less critical. And then, of course, solutions we develop should not interfere with operations around the platform, and that leads to has a number of consequences in terms of installation, deployment, and then maintenance. Next slide. So we've segmented the oil and gas in 4 broad categories, and apologies if that doesn't maybe correspond to industry standards, but seen from the eyes of marine energies, this makes sense to us. And so there's, first of all, the very low consumption side, what so-called lighthouse applications on the way to decommissioning, only lights and communication on the platforms. Platforms there typically don't have commercial, say, are not in production mode anymore. And so you'd want to have the lowest maintenance system possible. Sorry, to make sure you don't have to go on site, but also a system that's very reliable, so that you always adhere by regulations. And then we have unmanned and manned satellites. And on the opposite side of the spectrum, we have production platforms, which are running in extracting oil, and maybe the idea there is to electrify some of the production facilities. Now, another family which falls in a similar category is energy islands, and this is maybe a bit further in time, but it's the plans around decommissioned platforms that want to continue producing electricity, and that can be used to feed power back into the grid or into hydrogen production. There's a lot of ideas around how that could be done. But what we've identified is that there are different differentiators and selling points for marine energies, whether it's in the small, low power application side or the high power application side. And then typically, for instance, in the low power side, you'd want to have a steady power supply and maybe a lower battery capacity, while on the higher power application, you'd want to reduce the cost of fuel, for instance, and maximize carbon tax savings. And so that's also the kind of business models we're going to look at when addressing the different markets. Next slide. So across the spectrum of powers for those platforms, we've identified a spectrum of players, and this is a selection of some that are active in the space. But it's to give you an idea also of the variety of shapes and forms of solutions there, and the variety maybe of expected output from those systems. And where we come in is also try to find the best match between the requirements in the specific power level, and then a panel of marine energy developers that are active in that region. Next slide. So now, once we've done a project like this in the North Sea, of course, we're looking at other geographies and where we can replicate some of those initiatives. Mexico is a very promising country, also looking at the typical lifetime of the platforms in the Gulf, particularly in the Gulf of Mexico. And then just more generally, what applied in the North Sea in terms of fit between marine energies and oil and gas. A lot of it is true also in the Gulf of Mexico in terms, for instance, of low tides, but and good enough wave energy. So say the wave climate is fairly similar. And then what we want to stress is also the fact that in those circumstances, marine energies are a good fit for complementing typical wind or solar renewables. Thanks to its reliability, but also its dephasing compared to wind. So it'll typically generate electricity at a different moment than when wind is present, and that creates a nice complement. It nicely complements wind energy. As I mentioned, cost-competitive solutions already exist, and that's something that I want to stress one more time in this presentation. And I think what's missing is maybe making the link between the developers and oil and gas, and having them integrate in the right type of project, because I don't want to be overselling things here, but there are specific configurations in which marine energies will be particularly relevant for oil and gas, and the two worlds are not necessarily always in close contact, and that's something that we want to solve. And obviously, to do that, the buy-in and involvement from the oil and gas industry are key to kind of orient the developers on the kind of solutions that's relevant for them. So there are there's in particular if this is maybe a bit abstract, there's a great VR experiment that's maybe Thomas, you're gonna say a few words about later, but that allows you to see a bit how does that look like? What is exactly marine energy in action?
Thank you, Hisham. We'll have a look at the video in a bit. First, we have some questions for you, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, of course.
Excellent. First one. What do you see for the main fit for energy, for marine energy in Mexico, and which types of technologies, for which types of off-takers do you see?
Yes, so I think in looking at how platforms will have a tendency to go further and further from the shore, the question is which part of the energy systems are going to be electrified, and then for platforms that are maybe a bit older, what is the plan for decommissioning? And I think that's the first opportunity to look at, because it's also the easiest, and there the solution that would be a better fit. And of course, we'd have to look at that in a complete feasibility study. But it seems to be drop-in systems where you don't integrate anything physically within the platform. You drop it 50, 100 meter from the platform, ideally within the exclusion zone, to power specific set of equipment within the platform. And which equipment that is depends, of course, of the specific use case for the platform, but that's one of the probably simplest and most straightforward integrations between marine energies and oil and gas in the Gulf of Mexico.
All right, thank you for that, Hisham. And if we look at the case of Mexico, we look at renewables in Mexico. A lot of renewables is actually focused on solar. So how competitive are these marine energy solutions compared to the solar energy?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I think now we're talking about the kind of utility market and utility scale type of deployment. There's an ambition within Europe to have a target cost horizon 2025, 2030. So within 3 to 7 years at 10 euro cents per kilowatt hour. So it's higher than where solar is, and specifically Mexico, I think, is a great case for solar inland. But the question is, how do we power sites that are, for instance, coastal sites with higher density populations, and how do we deal with the fact that solar is very intermittent? I think we've seen again a lot of utility scale battery deployments that are as being discussed, but the fact is that during the night, instead of batteries, I think marine energies could be a nice an alternative for that base load I was talking about. So again, it's not really a case of competition and maybe direct LCOE comparison, but it's a case of the bigger picture. What is your energy system going to look like? How are you going to avoid $0 per kilowatt hour scenario for scenarios for energy, and how do you make sure you never have your demand never exceeds your offer in terms of renewables?
Thank you, Hisham. We have one final question. Is this only a solution for off-takes who consume the electricity offshore? Or should this be considered as a general solution for onshore and offshore energy consumption?
So today, marine energies are considered both for onshore and offshore solutions. So The case I was describing here is because we did a study specifically for offshore oil and gas. And also we're doing now more studies for platforms that are further away from the coast, where pulling cable becomes problematic. But of course, today, both tidal energy, wave energy is connected to coastal regions due to very high population density on those regions, the lack of space, and that makes marine energy a good potential energy source also for the main inland grid.
Excellent. Thank you, Isham. That is all the questions for now. If you have any other questions, we can direct them, I think, straight to you, Isham, afterwards.
Of course.
Through email. Thank you very much for your insightful presentation. You already mentioned it a little bit back in your presentation. Well, now that we've seen what these new solutions are in marine energy, it's also time to experience how these solutions can be integrated in climate adaptive infrastructures. A moment. So DMEC, Dutch Marine Energy Center, in cooperation with our partner in the Netherlands, and Knowing Business, have together launched a virtual reality experience about marine energy solutions. I will start now a video about this virtual reality experience. And this content is part of the virtual gateway to the Netherlands. And this gateway to the Netherlands enables foreign business and government to experience Dutch solutions for global challenges. There will be a video popping up in your screen. So please make sure to press play to see it. We'll take about 4 minutes to watch the video, and then we'll return to this session. So back to the presentation. A great way to experience the virtual gateway and its innovative solutions is through a virtual reality cardboard. I have one right here. All you need to experience virtual reality at home is a smartphone and this cardboard. And this allows you really to dive into the solutions, dive into the content with really simply only a smartphone and a cardboard. So if you're interested in receiving a cardboard, please contact us at Holland House Mexico, and we will send one to your home or office. With that, we've come to the end of the first part of today's program. We will now interrupt the Holland House Mexico breakout room to allow you to participate in the central program of the Mexico Oil and Gas Summit. Thank you again, Isham, for your great presentation, for being with us today. Thank you. We'll return to this breakout room for the virtual coffee break at 12. This is followed by a panel about Dutch-Mexican success story in the Mexican market at 12:30. And in the afternoon, we will have opportunities to connect with the Holland House Mexico team, also in this breakout room. So enjoy the second day of the Mexico Oil and Gas Summit. And we look forward to seeing you back here at noon. Thank you very much.